want the truth about what happened to Nolan Wells.
There is something about a Snapchat account that makes this case very different from the usual true crime investigation. Because when something disappears from a phone, that does not necessarily mean it disappeared everywhere. And in the Nolan Wells investigation, that distinction could be enormous. When Nolan's mother eventually got his phone back, she said something immediately stood out. The Snapchat account was empty. The stories were gone. The saved media was gone. And, according to the account given publicly by his mother, there was nothing from July 4th showing what Nolan had been doing that day, even though she expected Snapchat content from that period to still be visible. That became one of the earliest and most important questions surrounding Nolan's phone. What happened to the Snapchat activity? Was it never there? Was it deleted through normal Snapchat behavior? Was something removed from the device? Or could the information still exist somewhere outside the phone itself? Because that last possibility changes everything. A phone can lose data. An account can still leave records. And that is why the Snapchat trail has become so important to understanding Nolan Wells' final hours. Before we go any further, if you want true crime coverage that separates documented evidence from internet theories, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. This case is still developing, and we're going to follow the evidence as it develops rather than pretend we already know the ending. Now let's go back to the beginning. On July 4th, 18-year-old Nolan Wells went to Horn Island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast with friends. The group eventually returned to the mainland. Nolan did not. 2 days later, his body was recovered from the water near the island, and almost immediately, the investigation became surrounded by questions about what happened during the hours between Nolan being left behind and the moment his body was found.
The video. It is midnight. I just finished a workout and something clicked. I watched a video that made something else click that I watched earlier today, and that's this. The kid calls for a tow. The woman, Vicky, calls the captain to do the tow. And she says, this kid's grandfather, this Jerry Ackerman, is a member. Before she says the guy's name, the captain says, Jerry, I just got off the phone with him. I literally just got off the phone with him. And he said that they don't need a tow, that they're fine. So, hold on. The grandson is calling for the tow simultaneous to the grandfather calling the captain of the towboat saying they don't need a tow before the captain gets a call from Vicky. When did the kid call the grandfather? While the boat is sinking, he called grandfather for what could grandfather possibly do for you? He called the grandfather for what the fuck do we do? This kid's grandfather said, you got to make a fucking trail. That you tried to get help. There was an accident. Something happened. The boat's going under. Okay, it's a boat. Call. So there is a recording of you trying to get help for something, and we'll figure it out later. I think that their story has evolved, but that was what the grandfather thought of then, to create a timestamp in history of what was happening, what they were doing, where they were, and that there was a completely different emergency happening, nothing to do with Nolan, okay? And the grandfather did not want to get billed for this tow, and obviously didn't want the captain to go and happen upon whatever the fuck's going on. So he preempts the emergency call to the captain and says, hey, you might get a call, but they don't need it. I walked them through it. It's fine.
There were competing accounts. There were questions about the boat's movements. There were questions about phone records. There were questions about photographs and videos. And then there was Nolan's Snapchat account. His mother, Christine, said that when the family received his phone back, the Snapchat account did not contain the material she expected to find. That matters because Snapchat was not just another application on Nolan's phone. According to the material in these transcripts, Snapchat was one of the platforms Nolan had been using, and his account became relevant to reconstructing where the phone had been and what activity may have taken place during the crucial period. But there was an immediate problem. The information visible on the phone was not necessarily the complete digital record. And that is where this story gets much more interesting, because the family did not simply ask investigators to look at the phone. Their legal team pursued records from the platforms themselves. At the end of July, 5 subpoenas were reportedly directed toward Snapchat, Meta, WhatsApp, TikTok, and Life360. And these were not simply requests for messages. The requests reportedly included login histories, password reset records, two-factor authentication activity, and IP addresses associated with account access. That distinction is incredibly important, because imagine that a photograph disappears from a phone. That photograph might no longer be visible in the gallery. It might not be sitting inside the application anymore, but that does not necessarily answer the question of whether the account was accessed. If someone logged into an account from another device, for example, the service could potentially have records associated with that login: a timestamp, a device identifier or signature, an IP address, information that can potentially tell investigators something about when an account was accessed and from where. And that is why the Snapchat data matters so much. The question isn't simply, where are Nolan's missing snaps? The bigger question is, what digital footprint did those snaps leave behind? Because the phone may only tell investigators part of the story. The servers may tell them another part, and the two together could potentially be compared. If you're following this case closely, make sure you like this video and subscribe, because this is where the investigation gets especially important. The Snapchat trail isn't just about missing pictures. It's about whether the digital record can help establish what happened during the hours that remain unexplained. That is especially important because Nolan's location data was already raising questions. According to his mother, when she examined 2 different location histories associated with the phone, they did not agree. Snapchat reportedly showed one location history. Life360 reportedly showed another. Same phone, same general period. 2 records that apparently did not match. And that is the kind of discrepancy investigators cannot simply explain away by choosing whichever record fits the preferred timeline. It has to be examined, because location data can become powerful when it is combined with other digital evidence. Imagine having a Snapchat login at a particular time, then a location record from Life360, then a phone event, then a message, then a photograph, then the GPS record from the boat. Individually, each piece may tell you very little, but put them together and suddenly you can begin constructing a timeline. And the timeline is exactly what this investigation needs, because there is already a documented complication involving the boat. Records from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, as reported in the transcripts, showed the boat leaving Horn Island at approximately 4:31 that afternoon. But the boat did not simply return to the mainland dock and remain there. It later moved into Fort Bayou. It returned to the dock. It moved again to a boat launch, and eventually it was pulled from the water and taken to the owner's house. The movements covered almost 3 hours. Those GPS records are not, by themselves, proof that anything criminal happened. That distinction matters. A boat making several stops does not tell us why those stops happened. But it does establish something important. There is a timeline that can be measured, and once there is a measurable timeline, other evidence can be compared against it. That's where Nolan's phone becomes so significant. Because while the boat was moving, the phone may also have been generating information. And if Snapchat's records can establish when Nolan's account was accessed, when activity occurred, or what device was associated with that activity, those records could potentially become another clock against which the rest of the case can be measured. That is the real value of digital evidence. It doesn't have to tell you the entire story. Sometimes it only needs to tell you that one version of the story cannot fit the data. And there is already another contradiction investigators have to deal with. One account says Nolan stayed behind on Horn Island because he wanted to remain there and talk to a girl named Katie. Another account, from Katie's sister, says Katie believed Nolan was going back to the mainland with the same group he had arrived with. Those are not minor differences. They concern the reason Nolan was left behind. And according to the transcripts, Ben Crump summarized the contradiction by saying the 2 accounts could not both be true. But even that question has another layer, because Nolan's own digital activity could potentially help establish what he was doing around that time. Was he communicating with anyone? Was his Snapchat account active? Was the phone located where someone says Nolan was? Was the account accessed? Was there a digital record consistent with the explanation that he stayed behind voluntarily? Or does the digital record tell investigators something else? At this point, we have to be extremely careful. A discrepancy is not automatically evidence of a crime. A deleted Snapchat does not automatically mean someone deliberately deleted evidence. And a location mismatch does not automatically tell us which person is lying. Those conclusions require forensic analysis. But that is precisely why the Snapchat records matter. They can potentially move the conversation away from what people think happened and toward what the underlying data can actually establish. And that brings us back to the most important question surrounding Nolan's Snapchat account. What does missing actually mean? Because there are several possibilities. The data could have been deleted. It could have disappeared through ordinary application behavior. The activity could have occurred under a different account. The expected content may simply never have existed, or information may exist outside the phone itself. Those possibilities sound similar when you're scrolling through social media. They are not similar to a forensic examiner. They are completely different scenarios. If an examiner finds no evidence that the expected Snapchat activity ever existed, that could eliminate one line of suspicion. If the examiner finds evidence that data was deleted, then investigators can ask when that deletion happened, from which device, under which account, and under what circumstances. If the records show an account was accessed from another device, that creates another question. Who had that device? Where was it? When was the access? And does that timestamp correspond to something else happening in the investigation? That is why server-side records can be so valuable. They can potentially preserve information that a person looking only at the physical phone cannot see. And the transcripts specifically describe the family's legal team seeking information such as login histories, password resets, two-factor authentication activity, and IP addresses. That is not the same thing as saying those records have proven wrongdoing. It means investigators and attorneys were looking for a digital trail that could potentially survive the disappearance of content from the device. And that is a crucial distinction. The existence of a subpoena does not tell us what the data ultimately says. It tells us what investigators or attorneys wanted to know. The answer has to come from the records themselves. And that's where the story becomes even more complicated, because the physical phone itself became the subject of a dispute. According to the transcripts, Nolan's family and the district attorney's office agreed in principle to a joint forensic examination. The idea was that state investigators and experts retained by the family could be present during the extraction. That was important because the family had already raised concerns about the possibility of missing digital activity. But the two sides later disagreed about the process. The family's position, as described in the transcripts, was that the original agreement contemplated a joint examination with their experts present. The DA's office later reportedly wanted the phone delivered directly to law enforcement. The dispute was therefore portrayed not simply as whether the phone should be examined, but over how that examination should take place. That distinction became central to the delay, and for weeks, the phone reportedly remained unexamined. Think about how strange that is in the context of this investigation. You have a case where the victim's phone may contain information about his final hours. You have a family saying the Snapchat account appeared empty. You have two different location histories reportedly telling different stories. You have legal requests seeking records from Snapchat and other platforms. And yet the physical device itself remained caught in a dispute over forensic procedure. This is why the Snapchat information matters even beyond Snapchat. It represents the possibility of checking one digital record against another. If the physical phone says one thing and the server records say another, investigators have a problem they need to explain. If the records agree, that is also important. Confirmation is evidence. It doesn't have to produce a shocking revelation to matter. Sometimes the most valuable forensic result is the one that eliminates a theory. If the Snapchat data confirms the existing timeline, investigators have something solid. If it contradicts the timeline, they have something else solid. Either way, the uncertainty becomes narrower, and that is what forensic evidence is supposed to do. Narrow uncertainty, not manufacture certainty. The transcripts also contain another important piece of the digital story: photographs and videos. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office reportedly asked the public for original, unedited photographs and videos from Horn Island on July 4th. particularly material showing Nolan or an altercation. The word original matters, because an edited clip can tell you what somebody chose to show. An original file may contain additional information. Metadata can potentially help establish when a photograph or video was created, what device created it, and other information depending on what data remains attached to the file. Again, none of that automatically proves what happened, but it can help establish a timeline. And once again, the timeline is everything. Imagine a photograph that is publicly circulating. Someone says it was taken at a particular time. The metadata indicates something different. Now investigators have a question. Or imagine a video that appears to show one sequence of events. The original file contains information that places it somewhere else in the timeline. Again, that does not automatically prove deception. It means the original evidence needs to be examined. And this is why Snapchat is so important in the broader digital picture. Snapchat is not simply a place where teenagers post pictures. In an investigation like this, account activity can potentially become part of a larger digital chronology. The same goes for Life 360. The same goes for other social media platforms. The same goes for login records. The same goes for device information. The goal is not to find one magical piece of data that explains everything. The goal is to reconstruct what happened from multiple independent records. And that is why the reported Snapchat and Life 360 mismatch deserves attention. If two systems associated with the same phone produce different location histories, investigators need to understand why. It could have a completely ordinary technical explanation. It could involve differences in how the applications record location. It could involve timing. It could involve connectivity. It could involve how the applications store historical information. Or it could reveal something investigators did not expect. The point is that the discrepancy itself does not answer the question. The forensic examination does. And this is where we have to resist one of the biggest temptations in a trending true crime case. The temptation to take an unanswered question and turn it into an answer. There are already countless theories surrounding Nolan Wells. The transcripts themselves describe online speculation escalating to the point that people with no connection to the investigation were allegedly making threats against people involved. That is where true crime coverage can go badly wrong. Because when evidence is incomplete, people start filling the empty spaces. A missing Snapchat becomes proof of deletion. A deleted account becomes proof of a cover-up. A GPS stop becomes proof of a secret meeting. A contradictory statement becomes proof that someone committed a crime. But none of those jumps are justified simply because the case is unresolved. The real story is actually more interesting, because there are unanswered questions that can potentially be tested. And Nolan's Snapchat data sits right in the middle of that process. Consider what investigators could potentially learn from a complete digital examination. First, location. Where was the device during the critical period? Second, communications. Who was Nolan communicating with? Third, photographs and videos. What was captured and when? Fourth, application activity. Which accounts were active and what devices were associated with them? And finally, deleted data. Was something actually removed, or did people simply expect information that was never there? Those questions can be investigated, and they can be investigated without deciding beforehand what the answer should be. That is perhaps the most important thing about the Snapchat evidence. It doesn't have to prove one side right. It has to tell investigators what happened in the digital record. And there is another reason the Snapchat data is potentially significant. A witness can forget a time. A witness can misremember a conversation. A witness can give an account based on what they believed was happening. Digital records work differently. They are not perfect. They can contain errors. They can be incomplete. But they can provide timestamps and technical records that allow investigators to compare human recollections against machine-generated information. That comparison can be incredibly powerful. Suppose someone remembers Nolan being in one place at a particular time. If the digital record places the phone somewhere else, investigators have a discrepancy. That doesn't automatically prove the person lied. Perhaps Nolan left the phone somewhere. Perhaps someone else had it. Perhaps the location system was inaccurate. But now investigators have a specific question to answer. And if several independent records point in the same direction, the picture becomes stronger. That is how a timeline is built, piece by piece. not through one dramatic revelation. And this is why the Snapchat data could become one of the most important developments in the Nolan Wells investigation. Because the public has heard so many versions of the story, but the digital record does not care which version is popular. It does not care which attorney is speaking. It does not care which theory is trending. It simply preserves whatever information remains available. And if those records can be reconstructed, they can be compared against the stories already on the record. There is another detail that cannot be ignored. Warren Hudson, one of the people connected to the trip, has publicly denied that anyone removed information from Nolan's phone. According to the transcripts, he said nobody had access to the password and nobody touched the device before it was moved from the boat to a truck. That is a direct denial, and it matters because the digital evidence could potentially provide a way to test it. If the records show no unauthorized access, that is relevant. If they show an account was accessed from another device, that is relevant too. Again, neither result automatically proves criminal conduct. It simply gives investigators something objective to work with. And that is precisely what this case has been missing. Objective answers to questions that have been circulating for weeks. There is also the question of what happened to the Snapchat material itself. Christine reportedly said that Nolan had been using Snapchat and that the snaps she expected to find were gone. That statement became part of the public discussion very early. But another person connected to the friend's side publicly denied that missing Snapchats or messages existed. So we have competing claims. One side says the material appeared to be missing. The other says the suggestion that Snapchats were missing was false. That is exactly the kind of dispute that should not be settled by social media. It should be settled by evidence. If the records exist, examine them. If they do not exist, determine why. If they were deleted, establish when and how. And if nothing unusual happened at all, document that too. Because the objective should not be to prove a theory. The objective should be to determine what happened to Nolan Wells. And that brings us to the most important point about the Snapchat data recovery framework. The significance is not that Snapchat is some magical forensic tool. It isn't. The significance is that digital activity can create multiple independent records of the same period of time. One system can potentially be compared against another. A Snapchat record can potentially be compared against Life 360. Account activity can potentially be compared against phone activity. Photos can potentially be compared against GPS data. The boat's GPS can potentially be compared against all of it. And once those timelines are placed side by side, inconsistencies become much easier to identify. That is the kind of evidence that can move an investigation forward. Not speculation, not viral clips, not amateur detectives deciding they have solved the case. Data, records, timelines, and verification. The Nolan Wells case has already generated enormous public attention, but attention is not the same thing as evidence. Millions of people can watch a video and come away convinced they know what happened. That doesn't make the theory true. The same principle applies in the opposite direction. A public statement from an attorney doesn't automatically make a claim false. It simply becomes one piece of the record that needs to be compared against everything else. And that's exactly why the Snapchat evidence matters. Because the phone may have gone silent, but the digital trail may not have. The question now is not simply what was visible on Nolan's phone when his family got it back. The question is what records exist beyond that screen. What did Snapchat preserve? What did the other platforms preserve? What did the device preserve? What does Life 360 say? What does the boat's GPS say? And when all of those records are placed on the same timeline, do they tell the same story? Or do they force investigators to ask entirely different questions? Those are the questions worth watching. Because eventually, the speculation has to give way to evidence. And when it does, the most important piece may not be the loudest interview or the most viral video. It may be something much smaller, a timestamp, a login, a device record, a location, a photograph, a piece of data that survived after everyone assumed it was gone. Nolan Wells went to Horn Island on July 4th. His friends returned. He did not. 2 days later, his body was found. And since then, almost every major question has come back to the same problem. What happened during those missing hours? The Snapchat records may not answer that question by themselves, but they may help build the timeline that finally allows investigators to answer it. And that's the difference between a theory and evidence. A theory asks you to believe. Evidence gives investigators something they can test. For Nolan's family, that distinction matters more than anything happening on the internet. Because they aren't asking for another viral theory. They are asking for answers. And if the digital trail can help provide them, then every surviving record matters. Every login, every timestamp, every location, every piece of metadata, every trace left behind. Because even when a screen looks empty, the story behind it may not be. And in the Nolan Wells investigation, that digital story is still one of the most important pieces left to reconstruct. If you found this documentary informative, subscribe to Midnight True Crime and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. We cover the facts, follow the evidence, and bring you the latest developments in the cases that matter most. And before you go, we'd like to hear from you. What do you think is the biggest unanswered question in the Nolan Wells investigation? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, please keep the discussion respectful. The headlines may fade, but the search for truth never ends. This is Midnight True Crime. We'll see you in the next investigation.